Performing validation checking is not very useful if you don't also notify the user that the value is invalid. Marking invalid input elements in an Angular application relies on three features: the ng class directive, bootstrap styles, and Angular validation states. Here's an example. This example uses the Angular ng class directive to set the has-error bootstrap style class when the Angular validation state for the product name is invalid. Let's take this syntax step by step. The Angular ng class allows setting a CSS style class dynamically based on an expression that defines the set of desired classes. That expression can be a string containing space-delimited class names, an array whose elements are strings containing space-delimited class names, or an object literal defining a set of key-value pairs. The key is the style class name. In this example, the key is has-error. That's the name of the bootstrap style class. And the value is an expression that is evaluated. In this example, it is an Angular validation state, which we will cover shortly. If the expression is truthy, the class name defined in the key is applied to the element. Using the ng class directive allows for logic to define whether or not to apply a specific style or set of styles to an element, which works great for our validation. Bootstrap provides several validation styles. This is a screenshot from the Bootstrap documentation. The has success style by default displays in green, the has warning style displays in brown, and the has error style displays in red. We will use the has error style to mark any input elements that have validation errors. Valid entry will leave as is. We won't use the has success style, but you could use these other styles as desired. We said that marking invalid input elements in an Angular application relies on three features: the ng class directive, which sets the style class based on an expression, the bootstrap style, and Angular validation states. Angular provides a predefined set of validation states. $pristine identifies that the entry has not been changed. $dirty specifies that the entry has been changed. $valid specifies that the entry is valid based on any defined validation for the element. $invalid specifies that the entry is invalid based on the defined validation for the element. And $error gives you the list of all validations on the element and whether they are valid or invalid. It is basically a set of key-value pairs, where the key is the name of the validation rule applied to the element, and the value is a Boolean. That Boolean is false if the validation rule is broken. We'll use $error later in this module. In order to use these Angular validation states in the form, there are some prerequisites. The form must have a name. The input element must have a name. And the input element must be bound using the ng model directive. The ng model directive must be set for Angular to define the validation states. So let's show the user the validation errors by marking the elements with the has error style class using this technique. Here we are back in WebStorm with the Product Edit Info View HTML page open. As we just saw in the slides, we need three things in order to meet the prerequisite for marking the input element when it is invalid. We need a form name, check, a name on the input elements. We have an ID, but we don't have a name. We'll need to add that. And we need the ng model directive on the input elements. We already have that defined. So let's add names to the data entry elements that we plan to validate. We'll do the product name first. So we want to give it a name, and that name can be the same name as the ID, so we'll just use that. And we'll do the same thing for the product code. And we'll set it to the same name as the ID. Then we need to use the ng class directive to set a Bootstrap style class when the data entry element is invalid. If we add this class to the form group div, then it will mark both the label and data entry element as invalid. This draws the user's attention to the invalid field. So we'll put it here on this div. We'll do ng class, and we'll set it equal to an object literal. The key in the object literal is the name of the Bootstrap style class. We are using the hasError class. We need to put that in single quotes because the whole expression is already in double quotes. Then we need to specify the value of the key value pair. That's the expression that we want to evaluate. We want to evaluate the $invalid state for the input element. So we need to reference the input element. We do that by using the form name, just product form, dot, then the input element name, which is input product name, and then we can reference dot invalid. We want to make the same change to the product code, so we'll go to its form group div, and we'll add a similar ng class directive. So this line of code adds the hasError style class to this div element when the product form's product name element is invalid. And this one does the same thing for the product form's product code element. Let's give this a try. Select Add Product, and there they are. The input element appears immediately, showing us that there is an error, and the label even turns red. If we type something, the style is immediately changed, and the data entry element is no longer marked as invalid. Since the product code is a mask, typing in a single character won't make the field valid. I need to make the mask valid as well. So now it meets the requirement of the mask, and the product code is now valid. If I delete the value, the field is again marked with a validation error. But how will the user know what's really wrong here? It would be nicer if we also displayed a message telling the user why the input field is red. Let's add that next.